Her father sold her to a monster to pay off a gambling debt. For 6 months, she was locked in a gilded cage in Deadwood, kept pure, kept pretty, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Then one night, the building caught fire. A woman named Molly unlocked her door and whispered one word: "Run." Before Clara could pull her to safety, a gunshot echoed through the smoke. Molly fell, and behind her stood Victor Crane, pistol still smoking, already raising it again. Clara ran barefoot through the snow until her feet bled. She cut her hair. She changed her name. She hid in a coal car until she collapsed at the feet of a stranger, a man with cold gray eyes and scars of his own. He carried her home, left food at her door, and never once asked for anything in return. But Victor Crane has offered $500 for her capture. A bounty hunter is already watching from the hills, and the only man standing between Clara and the devil is a broken soldier who doesn't believe he deserves to save anyone, not even himself. You're listening to Western Twilight channel, where the dust of the frontier meets the heart of the human spirit. Stories of rugged cowboys, untamed lands, and the kind of love that's forged in fire. Survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about refusing to stop when everything inside you wants to give up. And sometimes the deepest healing begins when two broken people choose to stand for each other. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. I'll see you on the horizon.
6 months ago, Clara had been a respectable young woman in St. Louis. Her father owned a modest shipping business. Her mother taught piano to wealthy children. Clara herself had dreams of becoming a teacher, of filling young minds with poetry and possibility. Then her father's gambling debts caught up with him. She remembered the night everything changed. Her father on his knees in their parlor, begging a man in an expensive suit to spare his life. Victor Crane had smiled like a snake watching a mouse, his cold eyes sliding over to where Clara stood frozen in the doorway. "I will forgive the debt," Victor had said, his voice smooth as oil on water, "in exchange for your daughter." Her father had not even looked at her when he nodded. They dragged her to Deadwood that same night. For 6 months she had been locked in this room, fed enough to keep her pretty, allowed out only to bathe under watchful eyes. Victor was saving her, he said, keeping her pure for a special customer coming from Denver, a man who paid extra for girls who had never been touched. Tomorrow that man would arrive. Clara had spent every day of those 6 months looking for a way out. The windows were nailed shut. The door was always locked. Guards patrolled the hallways. But tonight, something was different. She could smell smoke. The fire started in the kitchen, they would say later. A knocked-over lantern, dry wood, and too much whiskey made for a deadly combination. Clara heard the first screams around midnight. Then the smoke began seeping under her door. She pounded on the wood until her fists bled. "Let me out," she screamed. "Please, someone let me out." The lock clicked. The door swung open. And there stood Molly, the older woman who brought Clara her meals, keys clutched in her shaking hand. "Run," Molly whispered. "Backstairs. Go now." Clara grabbed Molly's wrist. "Come with me." But before Molly could answer, a gunshot split the air. Molly's eyes went wide. A red bloom spread across her chest. She crumpled to the floor, and behind her stood Victor Crane, smoke curling from his pistol. His eyes met Clara's through the haze. She saw recognition there. She saw rage, and she saw something that chilled her blood. He raised the gun again. Clara ran. She did not remember much of what came next. Flames everywhere, screaming, the crack of burning timber. She found a window that the fire had already broken open, climbed through it, and dropped into an alley filled with snow. The cold shocked her back to awareness. She was barefoot. She was wearing nothing but a thin dress, and Victor Crane was somewhere behind her. She ran until her feet bled. She ran until the screaming faded, and the only sound was her own ragged breathing. She found an unlocked barn and buried herself in hay, shivering so violently she thought her bones might shake apart. In the morning, she stole clothes from a wash line. Trousers too big for her, a shirt that smelled like tobacco, a coat with holes in the elbows. She looked like a boy, she realized, and maybe that was safer. She cut her long auburn hair with a knife she found in the barn, leaving it ragged around her ears. For 3 weeks she moved from town to town, always looking over her shoulder. She heard the rumors. Victor Crane was offering $500 for the red-haired girl who had escaped his fire. She heard other rumors, too, that she had started the fire, that she had killed Molly, that she was dangerous. She was not dangerous. She was terrified. She jumped a freight train heading west, hiding in a car full of coal until her skin turned black with dust. When the train stopped at a small station in Wyoming territory, she climbed out and promptly collapsed at the feet of a man she had never seen before. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a pair of gray eyes, cold and hard as winter stone. Caleb Stone looked down at the creature that had fallen out of his train car. At first, he thought it was a boy. The clothes, the short hair, the coal dust obscuring any identifying features. Then he saw the delicate bones of the wrists, the curve of the jaw beneath the grime. And he knew. "Sam," he called to his ranch hand, "bring the wagon around." The young Mexican cowboy appeared at his side, eyes wide. "Boss, what happened to her? I do not know. But I am not leaving her here." He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was. Nothing but bones and desperation, this one. He had seen that look before in the eyes of men coming home from the war. In his own eyes, once upon a time. Sam brought the wagon, and Caleb laid her in the back, covering her with a horse blanket. As they drove toward Stone Creek Ranch, he found himself looking back at her more often than was proper. She slept like someone who had not slept in weeks, her breathing shallow, her brow furrowed even in unconsciousness. "What are we going to do with her?" Sam asked. "I do not know," Caleb admitted, "but whatever she is running from, it will not find her at my ranch." He did not know why he said that. He had spent 8 years building a life of careful solitude. He did not want complications. He did not want connections. He certainly did not want a half-dead woman with secrets in her eyes. But something about her reminded him of himself, and Caleb Stone had never been able to turn away from a wounded creature. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Caleb carried her into the cabin and laid her on the bed in the small room he used for storage. He sent Sam to fetch Ruth Blackwood from town, the closest thing Copper Creek had to a doctor for women. While he waited, he cleaned the worst of the coal dust from her face and hands. He saw the scars on her wrists then, thin white lines that spoke of desperate attempts to escape something. His jaw tightened. "What happened to you?" he murmured. "What kind of hell did you crawl out of?" She did not answer. She just slept, her chest rising and falling in that shallow, exhausted rhythm. Ruth arrived an hour later, took one look at the girl, and shooed Caleb out of the room. He waited on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one, until Ruth came out wiping her hands on her apron. "She will live," Ruth said. "But she has been through something terrible. The scars on her wrists are months old, maybe more. She is malnourished, dehydrated, and frightened half to death even in her sleep." "Did she say anything?" "Not a word. But she fought me when I tried to examine her." Ruth's eyes were knowing. "Whatever happened to her involved men, Caleb. She flinches at shadows." Caleb nodded slowly. He understood. He had seen women with that look before in the towns that sprang up around army camps during the war. Women who had learned that men could be monsters. "What should I do?" he asked. "Give her space. Give her time. Let her come to you when she is ready. And for heaven's sake, Caleb, do not touch her without permission. She needs to know she is safe." "She is safe," Caleb said. "Anyone who comes for her will have to go through me first." Ruth studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a sad little smile. "You are a good man, Caleb Stone, even if you do not believe it." After Ruth left, Caleb set up a bedroll in the barn. He would not sleep under the same roof as the girl, Not until she knew she had nothing to fear from him. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind and thinking about second chances. He had given up on his own second chance years ago. But maybe, just maybe, he could help someone else find theirs. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through an unfamiliar window and the smell of coffee brewing somewhere nearby. For one blissful moment, she did not remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory crashed over her like a wave of ice water. She sat up so fast her head spun. The room was small, plain, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. The door was closed. She stumbled toward it, heart pounding, and grabbed the handle. It turned. The door swung open easily, revealing a larger room beyond. A kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, a fireplace with dying embers, and on that table a plate of biscuits, a cup of coffee, and a folded piece of paper. Clara approached the table like it might bite her. She picked up the paper and read the words written there in a firm, masculine hand. Eat, rest. No one will hurt you here. Below that, just initials, CS. She did not know what to make of it. In her experience, kindness always came with a price. Men did not help women for nothing. There was always something they wanted, something they expected in return. But she was so hungry. She ate the biscuits in 4 bites, barely tasting them. She drank the coffee so fast it burned her tongue. Then she went to the window and looked out at a world she had never seen before. Rolling hills of brown grass stretched toward distant mountains. A barn stood perhaps 50 yards from the cabin, and beyond that she could see cattle grazing. 2 men were working near the barn, one tall and dark-haired, the other shorter with brown skin and a ready smile. The tall one looked up, as if he could feel her watching. Their eyes met across the distance. His face showed no expression at all, just those cold gray eyes taking her measure. Then he returned to his work, dismissing her. Clara spent the day exploring the cabin, testing windows and doors, mapping escape routes. Old habits died hard. She found clothes in a chest at the foot of the bed, simple dresses that smelled of lavender and dust. She found a pistol in the drawer of the bedside table, loaded and ready. She found food in the larder, enough to last weeks. Whoever CS was, he had given her everything she needed to survive, including apparently the means to defend herself. That gun confused her more than anything else. As the sun began to set, Clara heard footsteps on the porch. She grabbed the pistol and pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her heart hammering so loud she was sure it could be heard outside. A knock, then a voice, low and rough. "Miss, I am leaving dinner outside. There is a key on the inside of your door if you want to lock it. I will not come in unless you ask me to." Footsteps retreating. Clara waited until she could not hear them anymore, then cracked the door open. A tray sat on the porch, loaded with stew and bread and a cup of water. She grabbed it, locked the door, and ate standing up, still clutching the gun. That night, she did not sleep. She sat in the dark with the pistol in her lap, watching the door, waiting for the moment when her mysterious benefactor would reveal his true intentions. The moment never came. 3 days passed in this strange rhythm. Every morning she found breakfast on the table and a note telling her she was safe. Every evening she found dinner on the porch. She watched the tall man from the windows, learning his patterns. He rose before dawn and worked until after dark. He spoke little, even to the smiling cowboy who seemed to be his only companion. He moved like a man carrying invisible weights, his shoulders bowed by something heavier than physical labor. On the 4th day, Clara decided she had had enough of hiding. She found him by the barn, repairing a fence with practiced efficiency. He looked up when she approached, but did not stop working. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, stopping 10 feet away. "What do you want from me?" He drove another nail before answering. "Name is Caleb Stone. This is my ranch, and I do not want anything from you. Everyone wants something." "Then I guess I am not everyone." He finally looked at her properly, those gray eyes giving nothing away. "You fell out of a train car half dead. I was not going to leave you there. That is all this is." Clara did not believe him. She could not believe him. But she also could not argue with the evidence of the past 4 days. He had fed her, sheltered her, and never once tried to enter her room. Why, she asked. Why help a stranger? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because someone helped me once, when I had nothing left. I am just passing it along." He returned to his work, conversation apparently over. Clara stood there, uncertain, until he spoke again without looking up. "You can stay as long as you need. Work if you want to work, or do not. I will not ask questions. Your business is your own." She wanted to ask more. She wanted to understand this strange man with his cold eyes and his unexpected kindness. But the words stuck in her throat. "Thank you," she finally managed. He just nodded, still not looking at her, and drove another nail into the fence. That evening, Clara did not lock her door. Over the following weeks, she began to learn the rhythms of the ranch. She learned that Sam, the smiling cowboy, had ridden with Caleb for 3 years and would walk through fire for him. She learned that Caleb barely slept, that he worked himself to exhaustion every day, that sometimes at night she could hear him pacing in the barn where he had made his bed. She learned that he kept his promises. He never touched her. He never entered her room without knocking first. He never looked at her with hunger or expectation. He just existed alongside her, steady as the mountains on the horizon, asking nothing and expecting nothing in return. It was the most confusing experience of her life. One afternoon, while Clara was hanging laundry, Sam wandered over to chat. He had been trying to befriend her since she arrived, his easy warmth wearing down her defenses little by little. "You are wondering about the boss," Sam said. "Everyone does." Clara did not deny it. "He was in the war," Sam continued. "They put him in a prison camp for almost 2 years. Andersonville, they called it. Men went in as soldiers and came out as ghosts. He does not talk about it, but I have seen the scars." Clara thought about her own scars hidden beneath her sleeves. She thought about the nightmares that still woke her, gasping in the dark hours before dawn. "What happened after the war?" she asked. Sam's smile faded. "He had a woman waiting for him. Pretty girl, name of Emily. They were going to marry when he got back. But he was different after the camp. Harder, colder. She could not see past what he had become to remember what he had been. She left him for a banker 2 months after he came home." Clara looked across the yard to where Caleb was working, his back bent, his movements mechanical. She had thought his coldness was hostility. Now she wondered if it was simply armor, built up layer by layer to protect what was left of a broken heart. "He is a good man," Sam said quietly. "Best I have ever known. But he does not believe it himself. Does not believe anyone could ever want what is left of him." Clara thought about that for a long time after Sam walked away. She thought about her own certainty that she was ruined, that no one could ever look at her without seeing what had almost happened in that gilded cage. She thought about the way Caleb looked at her sometimes, like he recognized something in her eyes. 2 wounded people, orbiting each other in careful circles, too afraid to get close. That night, for the first time, Clara heard Caleb having a nightmare. His voice carried from the barn, a low moan that built into a scream cut short. She found herself standing on the porch before she realized she had moved, staring out at the barn, wondering if she should go to him. She did not. But she stayed on that porch until the screaming stopped, keeping silent vigil for a man who was doing the same for her. Clara had been at Stone Creek Ranch for 5 weeks when she first heard the name that haunted her nightmares spoken aloud. She was in town with Caleb, her first trip to Copper Creek since arriving in Wyoming. The journey had been her idea. She was tired of hiding, tired of flinching at every shadow. She needed to prove to herself that she could face the world again. Caleb had not argued. He simply hitched the wagon and asked if she wanted company. She had said yes before she could talk herself out of it. Copper Creek was a small town, dusty and rough around the edges, but it bustled with life. Clara saw a general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple, and what appeared to be a boarding house with lace curtains in the windows. People stared as they drove through, curious about the stranger at Caleb Stone's side. Let them look, Clara thought. They would tire of her soon enough. Caleb left her at the general store while he went to arrange some business at the bank. Clara wandered the aisles, running her fingers over bolts of fabric and bags of flour, marveling at the simple pleasure of being able to go where she wanted, touch what she wanted, without guards watching her every move. She was examining a display of ribbons when she heard the voice. "Victor Crane is offering $500, a man was saying to the shopkeeper. "Can you believe it? $500 for one little girl." Clara's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the shelves, heart pounding, and listened. "What did she do to warrant such a sum?" the shopkeeper asked. "Story goes she set fire to his establishment in Deadwood, killed some folks in the blaze. He wants her back real bad. Do they know what she looks like? Red hair, green eyes, scars on her wrists, young, maybe 20 or so. Pretty, they say, when she's cleaned up." Clara looked down at her wrists where her sleeves had ridden up to reveal the thin white lines. She pulled them down quickly, hands shaking. She needed to leave. She needed to find Caleb and get back to the ranch and figure out what to do next. She could not stay here, could not put these people at risk. Victor Crane would not stop looking. He had seen her witness Molly's murder. He would hunt her to the ends of the earth. She was nearly to the door when a woman stepped into her path. The woman was older, perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and shrewd brown eyes. She wore a practical dress and an apron dusted with flour, and she was looking at Clara like she could see straight through to her soul. "You look like you have seen a ghost, child," the woman said. Clara tried to step around her. "Excuse me, I need to go." The woman caught her arm, and Clara flinched so violently that several people turned to look. The woman released her immediately, holding up her hands. "Easy now. I mean no harm." She lowered her voice. "I am Ruth Blackwood. I own the boarding house across the street, and I know who you are." Clara's heart stopped. "You know nothing about me. I know you came off the train half dead 5 weeks ago. I know Caleb Stone has been keeping you at his ranch. And I know there is a man asking questions about a red-haired girl with scars on her wrists." Ruth's eyes were kind, but there was steel beneath the kindness. "I also know," Ruth continued, "that I do not care what you did or did not do. I have my own reasons to hate men like Victor Crane. Whatever trouble you are in, you have a friend in me." Clara did not know what to say. She had learned long ago that friends were luxuries she could not afford. Friends meant trust, and trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. But something in Ruth's steady gaze reminded her of Molly. Molly, who had died trying to save her. "I cannot put anyone else at risk," Clara whispered. Ruth smiled, a sad smile that spoke of old wounds and hard-won wisdom. "Child, you are not putting us at risk. Men like Victor Crane are the risk. All you are doing is surviving, and there is no shame in that." She pressed something into Clara's hand. "A key." "Boarding house is always open to you," Ruth said, "day or night. No questions asked." Before Clara could respond, Caleb appeared at her side. His eyes took in the scene instantly, moving from Clara's pale face to Ruth's knowing expression, to the key clutched in Clara's trembling hand. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. "Fine," Clara said. "Just making a friend." Caleb looked at Ruth, some silent communication passing between them. Ruth nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd, leaving Clara with more questions than answers. They did not speak on the ride home. Clara stared out at the passing landscape, her mind racing. She should leave. She should pack her few belongings and disappear before she brought destruction down on everyone who had shown her kindness. But where would she go? What would she do? Victor Crane's reach seemed to extend everywhere. She was so tired of running. "You heard something in town," Caleb said finally. "Something that scared you." It was not a question. Clara considered lying. She had become good at lying over the past months. But something about Caleb's quiet patience made her want to tell the truth. "There is a man looking for me," she said. "A bad man. He is offering a reward for my capture." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice remained calm. "How bad?" "He killed a woman in front of me, shot her dead for trying to help me escape. If he finds me, he will do worse than kill me." Silence stretched between them. Clara braced herself for the inevitable questions. "What did you do? Why is he hunting you? What are you not telling me?" But Caleb asked none of those things. He simply said, "Then we make sure he does not find you." Clara stared at him. "You do not know who this man is. You do not know what he is capable of." "I know what you are capable of," Caleb said. "I know you survived whatever hell he put you through. That tells me everything I need to know." He looked at her then, his gray eyes still cold, but something else flickering beneath the surface, something that might have been understanding. "I spent 18 months in a prison camp," he continued. "Men did things there that would make your Victor Crane look like a church deacon. I survived. I learned that survival is not about who is stronger or meaner. It is about who is willing to keep going when every part of them wants to give up. You kept going, Clara. You are still going. That counts for something." "Nobody has called me by my name in months," Clara said. She had not meant to say it aloud, but the words slipped out anyway. Caleb's expression softened slightly. "You got a last name to go with Clara." She hesitated. Then, before she could stop herself, she said, "Weston. Clara Weston." It was the first time she had said her real name since leaving St. Louis, the first time she had trusted anyone with that piece of her identity. "Clara Weston," Caleb repeated. He nodded once, like he was filing it away somewhere safe. "All right then, Clara Weston. Let us go home." Home. Such a simple word, but it made Clara's throat tight. She had not had a home since her father sold her like livestock. She had not dared to hope she would ever have one again. But as the wagon crested the hill and Stone Creek Ranch came into view, golden in the afternoon light, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of peace. Clara threw herself into work, learning to cook, to tend the garden, to help with the lighter ranch chores. She needed to be useful. She needed to earn her keep, even if Caleb insisted she owed him nothing. She and Caleb developed a careful rhythm. They worked side by side during the day, exchanging few words but communicating through glances and gestures. He taught her to ride properly, to shoot, to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him nothing, but somehow her presence seemed to ease something in him. He smiled more, she noticed. Not often, but more than before. At night they sat by the fire, Caleb reading while Clara mended clothes or practiced her knitting. Sometimes they talked. More often they simply existed in the same space, comfortable in their shared silence. Clara found herself watching him when she thought he could not see. The way his brow furrowed when he concentrated. The way his hands moved over the pages of his book, gentle despite their strength. The way his face changed when he forgot to hold it in its usual mask, becoming younger, softer, almost vulnerable. She was not falling in love with him. She could not afford to fall in love with anyone. But she was beginning to understand why Ruth had called him a good man. And she was beginning to wish in the quiet hours before dawn that she were the kind of woman who could deserve someone like that. One night, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Thunder shook the cabin, and lightning turned the darkness into day. Clara sat by the window watching nature's fury when she heard a sound that did not belong to the storm. Screaming from the barn. She was moving before she could think, grabbing her coat and running out into the rain. The barn door stood open, banging in the wind, and inside she could see Caleb thrashing on his bedroll, caught in the grip of some terrible nightmare. "No," he was shouting. "No, please, I cannot." Clara dropped to her knees beside him, not touching, just there. She remembered how he had helped her through her own nightmares, those first terrible nights when she would wake screaming, and he would call through the door, reminding her where she was, that she was safe. "Caleb." Her voice cut through the storm and the screaming both. "Caleb, you are at Stone Creek. You are home. You are safe." His eyes flew open, wild and unseeing. For a moment, Clara thought he might strike her. Then recognition flooded his face and he sagged back against the hay, chest heaving. "Clara," he said, her name like a prayer. "Clara, I am here. You were dreaming. I know." He covered his face with his hands. "I know, I am sorry. I did not mean to wake you. You did not wake me. The storm did." They sat in silence while the thunder rolled overhead. Clara could see him pulling himself back together piece by piece, rebuilding the walls he kept between himself and the world. She did something then that surprised them both. She reached out and took his hand. He went completely still, staring at their interlocked fingers like he had never seen such a thing before. His hand was rough and calloused, warm despite the cold, and it trembled slightly against hers. "You do not have to be strong all the time," Clara said quietly. "Not with me." Caleb said nothing, but he did not let go of her hand. They sat like that until the storm passed, two broken people holding on to each other in the dark, finding strength in shared wounds and silent understanding. When Clara finally stood to leave, Caleb spoke. "Thank you," he said, "for coming, for staying." Clara smiled, a small smile, but real. "Thank you for doing the same for me." She walked back to the cabin through the clearing storm, her hand still warm from his touch, her heart doing something complicated and frightening in her chest. She was not falling in love with Caleb Stone. She absolutely was not. The stranger arrived in Copper Creek on a Tuesday, riding a black horse and asking questions about a red-haired girl. Clara did not see him. She was at the ranch, helping Sam repair a section of fence that had come down in last week's storm. But Ruth saw him, and Ruth made sure Clara heard about it that very evening. "Tall," Ruth said, sitting at Clara's kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold between her hands. "Thin. Dressed all in black like an undertaker. Asked the right questions to the right people. Subtle, but I have been watching for men like him since you came to town." Clara's hands went cold. Did he say who sent him? He did not need to. Ruth's eyes were grim. "He is a bounty hunter, child. They call him Silas Kane. He tracks people the way other men track deer, patient and relentless. Victor Crane must want you very badly to hire someone like him." Clara thought she might be sick. She had known this day would come. She had hoped it would not come so soon. "What do I do?" she whispered. Caleb spoke from the doorway where he had been listening silently. "You stay here," he said. "You stay, and we prepare. This is my land, and I say who comes and goes on it. No bounty hunter is taking anyone from under my roof. Caleb." Clara stood facing him. "You do not know what you are getting into. Victor Crane is not some common criminal. He owns half of Deadwood. He has connections, money, power. If you stand between him and what he wants, he will destroy you. He can try." There was something in Caleb's voice, something cold and hard and utterly implacable. Clara had heard that tone before from soldiers who had seen too much death to fear it anymore. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you risk everything for me? You barely know me." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because someone did it for me once. When I came back from the war, I had nothing. I was nothing. Just a ghost wearing a man's skin, looking for a reason to stop existing. A rancher named Tom Blackwood gave me work when no one else would. He never asked about the nightmares or the scars or why I could not look people in the eye. He just gave me a chance to rebuild myself one day at a time." Ruth made a soft sound. Clara realized with a start that Tom must have been Ruth's husband. "Tom died last winter," Caleb continued. "Heart gave out while he was chopping wood. I never got to repay him for what he did for me, but I can pay it forward. That is what good people do, Clara. They help each other, not because they expect something in return, but because it is right." Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. She had forgotten that good people existed. 6 months in Victor Crane's hell had convinced her that the world was made entirely of monsters. But here was Caleb Stone offering to fight for her, expecting nothing in return. "You could die," she said. Caleb shrugged. "I have been dying slowly for 14 years. At least this way it would mean something." Clara crossed the room and did something she had never done before. She wrapped her arms around him. He went rigid with shock. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek, could feel the tension in every muscle of his body. But he did not pull away, and after a moment his arms came up to hold her, gentle and uncertain, like he was afraid she might break. "Thank you," Clara whispered against his chest. "Thank you for being good." They stood like that for a long time, Ruth watching with tears in her own eyes, until Clara finally stepped back. She did not feel embarrassed. She felt something else entirely, something warm and fierce and frightening. "So," she said, wiping her eyes, "how do we prepare?" They spent the next week fortifying the ranch. Caleb taught Clara to shoot in earnest now, not just the basics, but the kind of skills that could save her life. He showed her every hiding spot on the property, every escape route, every place where she could hold out if the worst happened. Sam rode out to neighboring ranches, spreading the word that there might be trouble at Stone Creek. One by one, the neighbors came. Weathered men with hard eyes and loaded rifles, women who could shoot as straight as their husbands. This was the code of the West, Clara learned. You helped your neighbors because someday you might need them to help you. Ruth came too, bringing more than just herself. She brought information. "I did some digging," Ruth said. "Asked around, called in some favors. Victor Crane is not just a businessman. He is connected to some very powerful people in Deadwood. Politicians, mine owners, railroad men. They protect him because he provides services they prefer not to discuss in polite company." "Services?" Clara repeated flatly. "You mean women?" Ruth nodded. "Girls, some of them. Runaways, orphans, anyone without family to come looking for them. He sells them to the highest bidder. You were meant for someone special, Clara. Someone who paid a premium for virgins." Clara felt sick. She had known, of course. She had understood what fate awaited her in that gilded cage. But hearing it spoken aloud in Ruth's matter-of-fact voice made it horribly real. "The fire," Clara said slowly. "The one that let me escape. Do you know how it started?" Ruth hesitated. "The official story is that a lamp was knocked over. Accident. But there are rumors. Some say Victor started it himself. The place was heavily insured and there were investigators sniffing around. A fire would destroy any evidence of what really went on there." "He killed those women," Clara whispered. "He killed Molly and probably a dozen others just to cover his tracks." "He is a monster," Ruth agreed. "But monsters can be killed. It just takes courage and careful planning." Clara looked at Caleb, who had been listening silently. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with cold fury. "We will need more than courage," Caleb said. "We will need proof. If we can expose what Victor Crane really is, we can turn his powerful friends against him. Nobody wants to be associated with a man who burns women alive." "And how do we get proof?" Clara asked. Caleb smiled, a thin, dangerous smile that Clara had never seen before. "We get someone on the inside," he said. "Someone Crane trusts. Someone who can testify to what he really is." "And where are we going to find someone like that?" Sam asked. Before anyone could answer, there was a knock at the door. Everyone reached for their weapons. Caleb motioned for Clara to stay back, then crossed to the door and opened it, pistol at the ready. A young woman stood on the porch. She was perhaps 19, with dark hair and frightened eyes. Her dress was expensive but travel-stained, and she clutched a small bag like it contained everything she owned. "Please," the girl said. "I need help. My name is Eliza Crane, and I am trying to escape from my brother." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Clara pushed past Caleb, staring at the girl on the porch. "Crane," she repeated. "You said your name is Crane." Eliza flinched. "Yes, Victor Crane is my brother. But please, you have to believe me, I am not here to hurt anyone. I came to warn you." Clara reached for her gun. Caleb caught her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. "Wait," he said. "Let her speak." "Why should we trust her?" Clara demanded. "For all we know, this is a trap. If it is a trap, we will deal with it." "But look at her, Clara. Really look." Clara forced herself to see past the name and the fear and the burning desire to strike first. She saw a girl barely out of childhood, thin and trembling, with bruises yellowing on her arms that her sleeves could not quite hide. She saw haunted eyes that reminded her of her own reflection in those dark months at the gilded cage. She saw a victim, not a villain. "Tell us," Clara said quietly. "Tell us everything." Eliza's story came out in fits and starts, interrupted by tears and trembling. She was Victor's half-sister, she explained. Their mother had been a prostitute who died when Eliza was 3. Victor had taken her in, raised her, controlled every aspect of her life. "He said I belonged to him," Eliza whispered. "He said everything I was, everything I had, existed because he allowed it. When I was 16, he started talking about selling me, finding me a husband who would pay for the privilege. But then your escape ruined everything." "My escape," Clara said. "The fire destroyed his business. The insurance investigators were suspicious. His powerful friends started pulling away. He became obsessed with finding you, not just for the reward. You were proof of his failure, his loss of control. He could not let that stand." Eliza's hands twisted in her lap. "He sent Silas Kane to track you. But he also sent me. He said I was to befriend you, earn your trust, find out where you were hiding and what you knew. Then Silas would come and finish it." Clara felt the betrayal like a knife between her ribs. "So, this is a trap?" "No." Eliza looked up, fierce despite her tears. "He wanted it to be. He gave me 3 weeks to find you and report back. If I failed, he said he would sell me to a man in Mexico who likes his women young and obedient." She pulled down her collar, revealing bruises around her throat in the shape of fingers. "This is what he did when I asked what would happen to you once Silas found you. He said I did not need to know. He said I just needed to do as I was told." Caleb spoke for the first time since letting Eliza in. "Why come to us? Why not just run? Because running is not enough." Eliza's voice hardened. "I have seen what Victor does to the people who try to escape him. Running just delays the inevitable. The only way to be truly free is to destroy him completely. And you," she looked at Clara, "you are the only witness to Molly's murder. You are the key to bringing him down." Clara stared at the girl who should have been her enemy. She saw her own desperation reflected back at her, her own fear, her own fierce desire to be free of Victor Crane's shadow. "Why should we believe you?" Clara asked. "This could all be lies. A clever story to make us lower our guard." Eliza reached into her bag and pulled out a leather-bound book. "This is Victor's private ledger," she said. "Names, dates, amounts. Every girl he ever bought, every man he ever sold them to, every politician he ever bribed. It is proof of everything." Clara took the book with trembling hands. She opened it to a random page and saw columns of neat handwriting. Names she did not recognize, followed by ages: 15, 16, 12. "Dear God," she whispered. "He is careful. He keeps records of everything, because he likes to hold power over people. But records can be used against him, too." Caleb took the book from Clara's numb fingers. His face, as he flipped through it, was terrible to see. "This is enough to hang him," Caleb said quietly. 10 times over, if we can get this to the right people." "Federal marshals," Ruth suggested. She had been silent until now, watching Eliza with shrewd eyes. "Victor has local law in his pocket, but federal marshals answer to a higher authority. If we can get word to them with this evidence, they will have to act." "There is one problem," Eliza said. "Silas Kane. He is already in the area watching, waiting for me to make contact with my report. If he sees that I have betrayed Victor, he will act immediately. He will not wait for instructions." "Then we deal with Silas Kane first," Caleb said. "How?" Clara asked. You said yourself he is dangerous. He is one man. We are many, and we have something he does not have. We have a reason to fight beyond money. Clara looked around the room, at Caleb, steady and resolute, at Ruth, fierce despite her years, at Sam, loyal and ready, at Eliza, trembling but determined. For the first time since fleeing Deadwood, Clara did not feel alone. What do you need me to do? She asked Caleb. He met her eyes and something passed between them. Understanding, trust, something more. I need you to trust me, he said, and I need you to be brave. Can you do that? Clara thought about everything she had survived. The betrayal of her father, the months of captivity, the fire and the running and the endless fear. She had been afraid for so long that she had forgotten what courage felt like. But looking at Caleb's stone, she remembered. Yes, she said, I can do that. They made their plan that night, huddled around the kitchen table by lamplight. Ruth would ride to Cheyenne in the morning, carrying copies of Victor's ledger to a federal marshal she knew from her late husband's ranching days. It would take a week, maybe more, before help could arrive. In that time, they would need to keep Eliza hidden and Silas Kane at bay. The bounty hunter was the wild card. He was patient, Eliza warned them. He would watch for days, weeks if necessary, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They could not let their guard down. We will take shifts, Caleb decided. 2 people awake at all times, day and night. Sam, you take first watch with me. Clara, you and Eliza get some sleep. Clara started to protest, then stopped. She was exhausted, she realized. The constant fear, the revelations of the evening, the wild hope that maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight. It had all taken its toll. Wake me if anything happens, she said. You will be the first to know. Clara walked Eliza to the small room that had been hers these past months. The girl looked around at the simple furnishings, the clean sheets, the window that overlooked the valley. It is beautiful here, Eliza said softly. I have never been anywhere so peaceful. It took some getting used to, Clara admitted. After everything, I kept waiting for something bad to happen. I could not believe anyone would help me without wanting something in return. And now I know that good people exist. It does not fix what happened. It does not make the nightmares stop. But it helps. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumping. Do you think they will really help me? Even though my brother is a monster. Clara sat beside her, close but not touching. Your brother's sins are not your sins, she said. You were as much his victim as anyone. Maybe more, because you had to live with him, had to pretend to be loyal while he terrorized you. I hate him, Eliza whispered. I have hated him for years. But I was too afraid to do anything about it until now. Fear does not make you weak. Clara reached out and took Eliza's hand. It makes you human. What matters is what you do despite the fear. You came here, knowing the risk. You brought evidence that could destroy him. That takes courage, Eliza. Real courage. Eliza looked at her, tears streaming down her face. I was supposed to be your enemy, she said. Victor told me you were dangerous, that you had killed Molly and started the fire. I did not believe him, but I was afraid to say so. Molly was my friend, the only friend I had in that place. She died helping me escape. Your brother shot her in front of me and would have shot me too if the fire had not spread so fast. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Clara squeezed her hand. We cannot change the past, but we can make sure Victor Crane never hurts anyone again. They sat together in silence as the night deepened. 2 women who should have been enemies finding common ground in shared trauma and shared hope. Outside, Clara could hear Caleb and Sam talking in low voices, keeping watch. For the first time in months, Clara fell asleep without nightmares. A week passed. Ruth made it safely to Cheyenne and sent word back that the federal marshal was gathering men and evidence. Help was coming. They just had to hold on. But Silas Kane was watching. Clara caught glimpses of him sometimes, a dark figure on a distant ridge, a shadow moving through the tree line. He never came close enough to confront. He was gathering information, Caleb said, learning their patterns, their defenses, their weaknesses. We have to draw him out, Caleb said one evening. Force a confrontation on our terms, not his. How? Clara asked. Give him what he wants, or at least let him think he is getting it. They devised a plan. Eliza would go into town, ostensibly to send a telegram to Victor with false information about Clara's location. In reality, she would be bait, drawing Silas Kane into the open while Caleb and the neighbors waited to spring the trap. Clara hated the plan. She hated the idea of using Eliza as bait, hated the risk, hated feeling helpless while others fought her battles. Let me do it, she said. Let me be the bait. This is my fight. Caleb shook his head. Kane knows what you look like. He has been hunting you for weeks. If he sees you alone in town, he will act immediately. We need him off balance, uncertain. Eliza can give us that. I can do this, Eliza said. Her voice was stronger than it had been that first night. I want to do this. For years I have been a coward doing whatever Victor told me. This is my chance to fight back. Clara looked at the girl who had become, against all odds, her friend. She saw determination there and a desperate need to prove herself. She understood both. Be careful, Clara said. Come back safe. I will. The day of the plan dawned gray and cold. Clara watched from the window as Eliza rode toward town, flanked at a distance by Sam and two of the neighboring ranchers. Caleb was already in position, hidden in the hills overlooking the road. Clara had wanted to go with them. Caleb had refused. If something goes wrong, he said, I need to know you are safe. I cannot focus if I am worried about you. She had been angry at first. She was not some helpless damsel who needed protecting. She had survived Deadwood. She had survived the fire. She could handle a bounty hunter. But then Caleb had taken her hand, his grip gentle despite his rough palms, and said, Please, Clara, let me do this for you. Let me be the one to keep you safe, just this once. And she had understood. This was not about her weakness. It was about his need to protect, to serve, to atone for whatever sins he believed he had committed. This was how Caleb Stone showed love, even if he could not say the word. So, she had stayed. The hours crawled by. Clara paced the cabin, checked the windows, cleaned the guns, paced some more. She was wearing a groove in the floorboards by the time she heard hoofbeats approaching. She grabbed her rifle and took position by the window. Then she saw the rider, and her heart nearly stopped. It was Caleb, alone, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted before the animal had fully stopped and ran toward the cabin. Clara, he shouted. Clara, we have to go, now! She met him on the porch. What happened? Where are the others? It was a trap. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the barn. Kane was not alone. He had men waiting in town. They took Eliza. Sam is hurt, maybe dead. We have to move. Wait! Clara planted her feet. Wait, this is happening too fast. Where are we going? Anywhere but here. Where? Kane knows where you are now. He is coming. We have minutes, not hours. Clara's mind raced. Something was wrong. The plan had been careful, deliberate. Caleb had accounted for every variable. How could it have gone so badly wrong? She looked at Caleb, really looked. His eyes were wild, frantic. His hands shook as he tried to drag her toward the barn. He was afraid. Caleb Stone was never afraid. The realization hit her like a bucket of ice water. You are not Caleb, she said. The man's face changed. The fear disappeared, replaced by cold amusement. Clever girl, Silas Kane said, and his voice was nothing like Caleb's at all. Too clever by half. Clara raised her rifle. Kane moved faster than she would have believed possible, knocking the weapon from her hands and spinning her around, his arm locked around her throat. Do not fight, he said calmly. I would hate to damage the merchandise before delivery. Clara fought anyway. She kicked and clawed and bit, but Kane was stronger and faster and utterly without mercy. Within seconds he had her pinned, her arms wrenched behind her back, his knee in her spine. Victor Crane sends his regards, Kane said. He has been waiting a long time for this reunion. Where is Caleb? Clara gasped. What did you do to him? Your cowboy is alive, for now. Whether he stays that way depends entirely on how cooperative you are. Clara stopped struggling. She knew when she was beaten, but she also knew that Caleb would come for her. He would not stop until he found her or died trying. She just had to stay alive long enough to give him the chance. "Take me then," she said quietly. "But know this, you will never spend that reward money. Caleb Stone will hunt you to the ends of the earth, and when he catches you, he will kill you slowly." Cain laughed. "I am counting on it." He lifted her like she weighed nothing and threw her over his horse. The last thing Clara saw before a bag was pulled over her head was the cabin she had called home for these past months, shrinking in the distance. She did not cry. She had cried enough in her life. Instead, she thought about Caleb's hands, gentle despite their strength. She thought about his voice, rough and uncertain, telling her she was safe. She thought about the way he had looked at her that night in the barn, like she was something precious, something worth protecting. She thought about all the things she had never said to him, and she swore that if she survived this, she would say them all. Caleb Stone woke to pain. His head throbbed where Cain had struck him. His wrists burned where rope had rubbed them raw. But worse than any physical agony was the knowledge that Clara was gone. He remembered riding back from town, relieved that the plan had worked. Cain had taken the bait, revealing himself to follow Eliza. Sam and the others had captured him without a shot being fired. They had won, except they had not won at all. The Cain they captured was not Silas Cain. It was a decoy, a hired gun wearing Cain's distinctive black clothes, sent to draw them away while the real bounty hunter made his move. By the time Caleb realized the deception, it was too late. He had ridden for the ranch at top speed, but Cain was already there, already had Clara, already vanished into the wilderness like smoke on the wind. Caleb had tracked them for hours before Cain ambushed him. The bounty hunter was good, maybe better than Caleb had given him credit for. He had left Caleb tied to a tree with a message carved into the bark nearby. "Deadwood. 3 days. Come alone, or she dies." It was a trap, obviously. Victor Crane wanted Clara, but he also wanted the man who had hidden her, the man who had cost him time and money and reputation. He wanted them both, and he would use Clara as bait to get Caleb, too. Caleb should have been afraid. He was not. He was angry. He was angrier than he had been since Andersonville, angrier than he had been when Emily left, angrier than he had ever been in his entire miserable life. Victor Crane had taken something that belonged to Caleb, not as property, but as something far more precious. He had taken the woman Caleb loved. Caleb had not admitted that to himself until this moment. He had told himself he was helping Clara out of obligation, out of a debt to Tom Blackwood, out of basic human decency. But it was more than that. It had been more than that for weeks. He loved her. He loved her stubbornness and her strength and the way she laughed when she forgot to be afraid. He loved the way she looked at him like he was worth something, like the broken parts of him could still add up to a whole person. He loved her, and he had never told her. And now she might die without ever knowing. That was unacceptable. Caleb freed himself from the ropes using a technique he had learned in the war, dislocating his thumb to slip his hands through the bindings. The pain was considerable. He ignored it. He found his horse nearby, tied to a tree but unharmed. Cain had left him the means to follow. The bounty hunter wanted this confrontation. He wanted Caleb to come to Deadwood to walk into Victor Crane's trap. Fine, Caleb would give him exactly what he wanted, but he would not come alone. He rode for Stone Creek first, hoping to find Sam and the others. What he found instead was Ruth Blackwood, armed to the teeth and furious. "We got your message," Ruth said. "The decoy. Sam figured out the trick and came back here, but you were already gone. Where is Sam now, gathering the men? Every rancher in 50 miles is riding for Deadwood. We are not letting Victor Crane take our girl without a fight." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. He had spent so many years alone, convinced that he did not deserve friendship or loyalty or love. He had built walls so high that no one could climb them. But Clara had climbed them anyway, and apparently so had these people who called themselves his neighbors. "The federal marshal?" Caleb asked. Ruth grinned, fierce and predatory. "Arrived in Cheyenne yesterday with a dozen men. They are already on their way to Deadwood. We sent word about Clara, about the ledger, about everything. Victor Crane is about to have a very bad day." For the first time since waking up tied to a tree, Caleb smiled. "Let us ride," he said. They reached Deadwood in 2.5 days, pushing their horses to the limit. The town was everything Caleb expected, and worse. A lawless mining camp turned lawless city, full of desperate men and desperate women, where money bought anything and morality was for sale to the highest bidder. Victor Crane's new establishment stood at the edge of town, a large wooden building with gilded trim and barred windows. The Gilded Cage, rebuilt from the ashes of the old one, a monument to one man's refusal to be defeated. Caleb studied it from a ridge overlooking the town. Beside him, Sam counted guards and measured angles of attack. 6 men outside, Sam reported, probably more inside. They are expecting trouble. "They are expecting me," Caleb corrected. "They are not expecting an army." Down in the valley, he could see dust clouds approaching from the south. The federal marshals right on schedule, and from the east, a smaller group of riders, the ranchers, his neighbors, the people who had shown up when he needed them most. Caleb turned to Ruth. "Take the ledger to the marshals. Make sure they have everything they need to arrest Victor Crane. I am going in to get Clara." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You will be walking into a trap." "I know. You might not walk out again. I know that too. But Clara is in there and she's waiting for me to keep my promise. I told her I would keep her safe. I am not breaking that promise." Ruth studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Tom would have been proud of you," she said quietly. "I am proud of you. Now go save our girl." Caleb spurred his horse toward the town, toward the trap, toward the woman he loved. He did not look back. The guards saw him coming, of course. They let him approach, weapons raised but not firing. Victor Crane wanted him alive, at least long enough to gloat. The front door of the Gilded Cage swung open as Caleb dismounted. A thin man in black stepped out. Silas Kane, finally showing his true face. "Mr. Stone," Kane said pleasantly. "Right on time. Mr. Crane is expecting you. Lead the way." They disarmed him at the door. 2 pistols, a knife in his boot, another knife strapped to his forearm. They did not find the tiny blade hidden in his belt buckle. They did not find the derringer sewn into the lining of his coat. Caleb had learned long ago to always have more weapons than enemies expected. The interior of the Gilded Cage was obscene in its opulence. Crystal chandeliers, velvet furniture, gilded frames around paintings of naked women. Caleb's stomach turned at the thought of Clara in this place. Kane led him to a private room at the back of the building. Inside, seated behind a mahogany desk, was Victor Crane. He was smaller than Caleb had imagined. Slim, elegant, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He looked like a banker or a lawyer, not a monster. But Caleb had learned in the war that monsters rarely look the part. "Mr. Stone," Victor said, his voice smooth as honey, "how good of you to join us. Clara has been telling me all about you." Caleb's blood went cold. "Where is she?" "Safe, for now." Victor gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Caleb did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on Victor Crane's face. "Here is what is going to happen," Caleb said quietly. "You are going to release Clara. You are going to let us walk out of here unharmed. And then you are going to pray that the federal marshals get to you before I do." Victor laughed. "Federal marshals? Is that the cavalry you are expecting?" "I am afraid they will be delayed. A rock slide on the main road. Very unfortunate. By the time they arrive, you and Clara will be long gone, and I will be miles away with all evidence of my activities destroyed." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. The cold, tactical part of his mind began calculating odds and options. Victor thought he had won. Victor thought he was in control. That made him dangerous. but it also made him careless. "You seem very confident," Caleb said. "I have every reason to be." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Do you know why I sent Silas to find Clara, Mr. Stone? It was not just about the reward or the pleasure of breaking her. It was about sending a message. No one escapes Victor Crane. No one defies me and lives to tell the tale. Clara defied you. Clara escaped." Victor's smile thinned. "A temporary inconvenience. One I intend to rectify tonight. She will learn what happens to women who forget their place. And you will have a front row seat before Silas puts a bullet in your brain." He gestured to Kane. "Bring her in. Let Mr. Stone see what becomes of heroes in my world." Kane left the room. Caleb used the moment to scan his surroundings. 2 guards by the door. Victor behind the desk. Kane somewhere in the building, presumably with Clara. The odds were not good, but Caleb had faced worse. The door opened again. Kane entered, dragging Clara by the arm. She looked terrible. Her face was bruised, her dress torn, her wrists raw from restraints. But her eyes, God! Her eyes were still fierce, still defiant, still blazing with the fire that had drawn Caleb to her from the start. "Caleb," she breathed when she saw him. "You came." "I promised," he said simply. "How touching," Victor sneered. "The cowboy and his whore. Do you know, Mr. Stone, what I had planned for her? A client in Mexico who pays handsomely for pale-skinned women. He likes to break them slowly, over months, until there is nothing left but an empty shell. I was going to sell her to him tonight." Clara spat at him. The glob of saliva landed on his pristine jacket. Victor's face contorted with rage. "You will regret that," he snarled. "I regret nothing," Clara said. "And when the marshals get here, you will be the one full of regrets. The marshals are not coming." But even as Victor said it, Caleb heard something that made his heart soar. Gunshots, outside the building, shouts, the sounds of chaos. Victor's face paled. "What is that?" "Kane, go see what is happening." Kane moved toward the door. Before he could reach it, it burst open. Sam stood in the doorway, bloodied but grinning, a smoking pistol in each hand. "Surprise," Sam said. "Everything happened at once." Caleb lunged for the guard nearest him, driving his hidden blade into the man's throat. Clara dropped to the floor, out of the line of fire. Kane drew his weapon, but Sam was faster, putting 2 bullets in the bounty hunter's chest before he could aim. Victor Crane tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Caleb caught him, slamming him against the wall with a force that cracked plaster. "Please," Victor gasped. "I can pay you. Anything you want. Name your price." Caleb leaned in close. "My price," he said softly, "is watching you hang for what you did. To Clara, to Molly, to every woman you ever bought and sold like cattle. The marshals may be delayed, but they are coming. And when they get here, you are going to answer for every single crime in that ledger." He released Victor, letting the man crumple to the floor. Then he turned to Clara. She was on her feet, trembling but whole. Her eyes searched his face like she was memorizing every line. "You came," she said again. "I will always come," he said. "No matter what, no matter where. As long as I am breathing, I will find you." He opened his arms, and she flew into them. And for a long moment there was nothing in the world but the 2 of them, holding each other in the ruins of Victor Crane's empire. "I love you," Clara whispered against his chest. "I should have told you before. I love you, Caleb Stone, and I am never letting you go." Caleb closed his eyes, feeling something crack open inside him. Something he had kept locked away for 14 years. "I love you too," he said. "And I am never letting you go either." Outside, the sounds of battle faded to silence. The marshals had finally arrived. Victor Crane's reign of terror was over, and Caleb Stone, for the first time since the war, allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he deserved the woman in his arms. The weeks after Deadwood blurred together in a haze of depositions and testimonies, and sleepless nights spent holding each other through nightmares. Victor Crane was in custody, awaiting trial for enough crimes to guarantee the gallows. Silas Kane was dead. The gilded cage was shuttered, its victims freed, its secrets exposed. Eliza Crane, rescued in the initial chaos of the raid, was staying with Ruth Blackwood while she figured out how to build a life free from her brother's shadow. And Clara Weston was home. She still had nightmares. She still flinched sometimes when shadows moved unexpectedly or strangers got too close. She still woke in the dark hours before dawn, heart pounding, convinced that she was back in that locked room in Deadwood with Victor's footsteps approaching her door. But the nightmares came less frequently now. And when they did come, Caleb was there. He had moved back into the cabin, into the small room that had once been Clara's refuge. She had insisted, her face burning with embarrassment, that she wanted him close. Not for anything improper, just for the comfort of knowing he was there. Caleb had agreed without hesitation. He slept on a cot pushed against the far wall, close enough to hear if she cried out, far enough to give her space. Some nights, she woke screaming, and he would be there in seconds, not touching her, just talking in that low, steady voice until the terror faded. Some nights, she reached for him, and he held her while she cried. They did not speak of the future. Clara was not ready, and Caleb was patient as a stone. He had waited 8 years in solitude. He could wait as long as she needed. But as spring turned to summer, something began to shift between them. It started with small touches. Clara's hand on his arm when she passed him a cup of coffee. Caleb's fingers brushing hers when they worked together in the garden. Lingering looks that said more than words ever could. Then came the night when Clara could not sleep, and she found Caleb on the porch, staring at the stars. "May I join you?" she asked. He shifted to make room on the bench, and she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I have been thinking," Clara said quietly, "about what happens next." Caleb's jaw tightened. "If you want to leave, I understand. You do not owe me anything. You never did. Leave." Clara turned to look at him. "Why would I want to leave?" "Because you are free now. Victor Crane cannot hurt you anymore. You can go anywhere, do anything. You do not have to stay here with a broken-down cowboy who cannot even tell you how he feels without choking on the words." Clara was silent for a long moment. Then, carefully, deliberately, she took his hand. "I am going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" Caleb nodded, his throat too tight for speech. "Before I came here, I thought I knew what my life would be. Married off to some man my father owed money to, trapped in a gilded cage of my own, just a different kind. Then Victor Crane showed me how much worse it could be. He showed me that I was property to be bought and sold, that my body did not belong to me, that my desires did not matter." She squeezed his hand. "You showed me something different. You showed me that kindness exists, that safety exists, that a man can look at a woman without wanting to own her. When I was in Deadwood, tied up in that room, waiting for Victor to come for me, I was not afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying without telling you how much you mean to me." Caleb turned to face her. His eyes were bright in the starlight. "Clara," he said hoarsely, "let me finish." Clara lifted her free hand to his face, cupping his jaw. "I love you, Caleb Stone. I love your patience and your strength, and the way you never pushed me for more than I could give. I love that you taught me to shoot and ride and believe in myself again. I love that you came for me when anyone else would have run. And I love that you are sitting here, afraid to hope, because you do not think you deserve happiness." She leaned closer, her lips inches from his. "You deserve happiness," she whispered. "You deserve love. You deserve me, if you will have me." Caleb made a sound, half laugh and half sob. "If I will have you. Clara, I have loved you since the moment I found you at that train station. I have loved you through every nightmare and every flashback and every day you pushed me away because you were afraid. I will love you until the day I die and probably long after that. Having you is not the question. Deserving you, that is what I struggle with. Then let me help you, Clara said. Let me show you what you deserve. She kissed him. It was not their first kiss. There had been stolen moments, brief touches of lips after particularly bad nightmares or particularly good days, but this was different. This was intentional. This was a declaration. Caleb kissed her back with a desperation that spoke of years of loneliness. His hands came up to cradle her face, gentle despite their strength, trembling despite their size. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara smiled. "See?" she said. "That was not so hard." Caleb laughed, an actual laugh, full and warm and completely unguarded. "I love you," he said. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," Clara said. "I am terrified too. We can be terrified together." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars wheel overhead. For the first time in as long as either of them could remember, the future did not seem quite so frightening. The next morning, Clara woke to find Caleb already up making breakfast. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the smile on his face made her heart skip. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." Clara crossed to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "What are you making?" "Eggs, bacon, biscuits, if I can manage not to burn them." "You always burn them." "I know." He turned in her arms, pulling her close. "But I keep trying." Clara looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life, and then patiently waited while she saved herself. She thought about all the things she still feared: intimacy, vulnerability, the possibility that the happiness she felt was too fragile to last. But she also thought about all the things she had already survived, and she knew with sudden clarity that she was stronger than her fears. "Caleb," she said, "I want to try something, anything. I want you to kiss me, really kiss me, and I want to not be afraid." His eyes searched her face. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I want to try anyway." He leaned down, slow and careful, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When his lips met hers, she felt the familiar flutter of panic. But she pushed through it, focusing on the feel of him, the taste of him, the warmth of his hands on her back. The panic faded. Something else took its place, something warm and hungry and entirely new. She pulled back, breathless. "That was good," she said. "Yeah." Caleb's voice was rough. "It was. I want to do that again. Now. Soon." She smiled. "But first, finish making breakfast. You promised me biscuits." Caleb laughed. That wonderful, unguarded laugh that Clara was beginning to treasure above all other sounds. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Whatever you say." They ate breakfast together, knees touching under the table, stealing glances when they thought the other was not looking. Sam came in halfway through, took one look at them, and immediately turned around. Finally, he muttered as he left. "Took you long enough," Clara burst out laughing. Caleb joined her a moment later, and for a little while the cabin was filled with nothing but joy. The trial happened in late summer. Clara testified for 3 days, telling the whole horrible truth to a courtroom full of strangers. Caleb sat in the front row the entire time, his steady presence giving her the strength to continue when the memories threatened to overwhelm her. Victor Crane was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to hang, and Clara was there when they put the noose around his neck. She did not enjoy it, not exactly, but she needed to see it. She needed to know with her own eyes that he could never hurt anyone again. Eliza stood beside her, holding her hand. The two women had become unlikely friends, bonded by their shared history and their shared hope for the future. "It is over," Eliza said as they watched Victor's body swing. "No," Claire replied, "it is just beginning." She looked across the crowd to where Caleb waited, patient, as always. He caught her eye and smiled. and Clara felt something she had thought was lost forever. Home. She was finally going home. The autumn came gentle to Wyoming that year, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber. Clara stood on the porch of the cabin, watching leaves drift from the cottonwood trees by the creek, thinking about how much had changed since the spring. She was stronger now. The nightmares still came, but less often, and when they did, she knew how to fight them. She could ride and shoot and manage the household accounts. She had friends. Ruth, who treated her like a daughter. Sam, who teased her mercilessly but would fight to the death for her. Eliza, who had moved to Copper Creek and was learning to live a life of her own choosing. And she had Caleb. He came up behind her now, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. She leaned back into him automatically, marveling at how natural it felt. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The future." His arms tightened slightly. "Good thoughts or bad?" "Good. Mostly good." She turned in his embrace, facing him. Over the past months, the physical intimacy between them had grown slowly, carefully, each step forward a victory over the fear that still lurked in the corners of her mind. They had not yet been fully together, not in the way of husbands and wives. Clara was not ready. Caleb had not pushed, but she was beginning to think that maybe she could be ready soon. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what happens next. Me too." Caleb's voice was steady, but she could see the vulnerability beneath the surface. "I have been thinking about asking you something, but I do not want to push you. I do not want to be another man demanding things you are not ready to give." Clara reached up to touch his face. "You are nothing like those men. You have never demanded anything from me. That is why I trust you. What do you trust me with?" She took a breath. "Everything." Caleb went very still. "Clara, I am not saying I am ready for everything right now, but I am saying I want to be. I want to try. I want to build a future with you, Caleb Stone, for real. Not just surviving together, living together, loving together." Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I had a speech prepared," he said, "about how I do not deserve you, about how you should find someone whole instead of a broken-down soldier. But I am done pushing you away. If you want me, Clara Weston, I am yours, now and always. Then ask me," she said. "Ask me what you have been wanting to ask." Caleb took her hands in his. He dropped to one knee in the autumn leaves, looking up at her with an expression of such love that Clara felt her heart might burst. "Clara," he said, "will you marry me?" She did not hesitate. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times, yes." He stood and kissed her, and Clara kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "We are ridiculous," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "We are perfect," Caleb corrected. "We are exactly what we were always meant to be." They were married a week later in the church at Copper Creek, with Ruth Blackwood as witness and Sam as best man, and Eliza throwing wildflowers in their path. It was a simple ceremony. Nothing like the elaborate weddings Clara had once dreamed about as a girl in St. Louis. It was perfect. That night, as they walked into the cabin that was now truly their home, Clara felt the familiar flutter of fear. This was the moment she had dreaded for so long. The wedding night. The first night of marriage. The night when men expected their property to submit. Caleb sensed her tension. He stopped just inside the door, releasing her hand. "We do not have to do anything," he said quietly. "Nothing has to happen tonight, or tomorrow night, or any night until you are ready. I married you because I love you, not because I wanted access to your body. Whatever you need, Clara, that is what I want." The fear began to ease. Clara looked at this man, her husband now, who had never once demanded more than she could give, who had waited months for even a kiss, who had proven over and over again that his love was patient and kind and completely without conditions. She took his hand and led him to the bedroom. "I am scared," she admitted. "I am scared of the memories it might bring back. I am scared I will freeze up and ruin everything. But I am more scared of letting that fear control me for the rest of my life." "What do you want me to do?" Caleb asked. "Go slow. Stop if I ask. Remind me that I am safe, that I am here, that I am with you. Always," he said. What followed was nothing like what Clara had feared. It was slow and gentle and full of whispered questions. "Is this okay? Does this feel good? Do you want me to stop?" Caleb was patient beyond measure, his hands careful, his voice soft, treating her like something precious rather than something to be conquered. When the panic rose up, as it inevitably did, he stopped immediately. He held her while she shook, talked her through the memories, reminded her that she was not in Deadwood. She was not trapped. She could leave any time she wanted. She did not want to leave. Gradually, slowly, the panic faded. And in its place came something else. Warmth, safety, pleasure, love. When it was over, Clara lay in her husband's arms, tears streaming down her face. "I did not know it could be like that," she whispered. "I did not know it could feel like love instead of violence." Caleb kissed her forehead. "It is always supposed to feel like love. Anything else is a lie." She curled closer to him, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "Thank you," she said, "for waiting, for being patient, for showing me that I do not have to be afraid anymore." "Thank you for trusting me," he said, "for giving me the chance to prove that I could be the man you needed, for loving me even when I did not love myself." They fell asleep, tangled together, two wounded people who had found healing in each other's arms. 1 year later, Clara stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Her hand rested on the swell of her belly, where new life grew. She was 5 months along, and every day she marveled at the miracle of it. Behind her, she heard the door open and close. Caleb's arms came around her, his hands joining hers on her stomach. "How are my girls?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her neck. "We do not know it is a girl yet. I have a feeling." He smiled against her skin. "Call it intuition." Clara leaned back into him, content in a way she had never imagined possible. The past year had not been easy. There were still nightmares, though they came rarely now. There were still moments when old fears rose up and threatened to drown her. But Caleb was always there, steady as the mountains, patient as the turning of the seasons. And slowly, day by day, Clara had learned what it meant to be truly free. "I was thinking about names," she said. "If it is a girl, I want to call her Hope. Hope Stone." Caleb considered it. "I like that." "She would be proof," Clara continued. "Proof that hope is possible, even when everything seems lost. That healing is possible. That love is possible. That the darkness does not have to win." Caleb turned her gently to face him. His eyes, those gray eyes that had once seemed so cold, were warm with love. "You are that proof," he said. "Every day, just by existing, you remind me that second chances are real, that it is never too late to start over, that broken people can become whole again." "Only because of you," Clara said. "You gave me a place to heal. You gave me time and patience and love without conditions. You showed me what a good man looks like." "You showed me the same thing," Caleb said. "A good woman who did not give up on me even when I tried to give up on myself." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the last of the light fade from the sky. Down in the valley, Clara could see the ranch they had built together over the past year. More cattle, more horses. A bunkhouse for the hands who now worked alongside Sam. They had prospered, against all odds, and the future stretched before them full of promise. Ruth came to visit regularly, always bringing news from town and freshly baked bread. Eliza had started a small school in Copper Creek, teaching children whose parents could not afford fancy education. Sam had finally proposed to a pretty widow who ran the general store, and the wedding was set for spring. Life had moved on. The wounds were healing. And Clara Weston Stone, who had once been property to be bought and sold, was now a woman of substance, respected in her community, beloved by her husband, soon to be a mother. If someone had told her 2 years ago that this future awaited her, she would not have believed them. She had been so certain that her life was over, that she was ruined beyond repair, that no decent person could ever want what was left of her. Caleb had proven her wrong, not by fixing her, not by saving her, but by standing beside her while she saved herself. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked. "How lucky I am." He laughed, that wonderful, unguarded laugh that she never tired of hearing. "I think I am the lucky one. We are both lucky." Clara smiled. We found each other. That night, as they lay in bed together, Clara felt their baby kick for the first time. She grabbed Caleb's hand and pressed it to her belly, and they both held their breath as the tiny life inside her made its presence known. "Hello, little one," Caleb whispered. "I am your father, and I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life keeping you and your mother safe. I will teach you to ride and shoot and read the stars. I will tell you stories about how your mother was the bravest woman I ever met. And I will love you unconditionally from this moment until my last breath." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Happy tears. The kind she had not known existed until she came to Stone Creek Ranch and met a patient cowboy who showed her that love could be gentle. "I used to be afraid," she said quietly, "of wedding nights and husbands, and the things that men do to women they own. I thought that was all there was. I thought love was just another word for control. And now," Caleb asked, "now I know the truth." Clara rolled to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "Love is not about owning or controlling. It is about choosing every day to put someone else's happiness alongside your own. It is about patience and trust and the courage to be vulnerable. It is about finding someone who sees your scars and loves you not despite them, but because of them." She kissed him, soft and slow. "You showed me all of that," she said. "You showed me that I did not have to be afraid. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful." "Just love me," Caleb said. "That is all the gratitude I need. I do love you." Clara smiled, feeling the baby kick again, feeling Caleb's hand warm on her belly, feeling the future spread out before them, bright and full of promise. "I love you, Caleb Stone, now and always." "Always," he agreed. "And forever." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead and the mountains stood sentinel, and the wind whispered secrets through the cottonwood trees. And inside a small cabin on a Wyoming ranch, two people who had thought they were broken beyond repair held each other close and marveled at the miracle of second chances. Clara had once feared her first night as a wife. She had fled from one wedding and nearly died running from another kind of cage. She had known only cruelty and ownership, and the cold calculation of men who saw women as property. But Caleb Stone had shown her something different. He had shown her that patience was strength, that gentleness was courage, that love, real love, did not demand or take or possess. It simply gave. And in giving, it healed wounds that had seemed unhealable. It restored hope that had seemed lost forever. It built a future from the ashes of the past. Clara closed her eyes, listening to her husband's heartbeat, feeling their child grow inside her, knowing with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. She was finally, truly, completely home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.